A Singaporean man is set to go on trial in the US for allegedly stealing and laundering hundreds of millions in cryptocurrency. Malone Lam was arrested in September 2024. Along with accomplice, says Jeandiel Serrano, he's accused of taking 4,100 bitcoins from a high net worth investor. At today's prices, that would be worth more than $450 million. Lam was also charged for heading a crime ring. US prosecutors have called the scam one of the biggest cases of cryptocurrency theft in the US by a private individual. For each offence, the Singaporean faces up to 20 years in jail, a fine of up to $250,000, or up to twice his gains from those scams. And Toni Waterman is covering this story for CNA outside the courthouse in Washington, D.C. Toni, we're set to hear the start of this case soon. What can we expect?
Yeah, you're right. This is day one in this trial, which could last up to several weeks. This is jury selection that is going to start today. And depending on how long that takes, we could even start to get the opening arguments in this case. Malone Lam faces 3 charges: a RICO conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering, and he's accused of being part of this elaborate scheme to steal hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency. Prosecutors allege that he and 12 associates formulated this plan where they identified individuals that had these vast holdings of virtual currencies. They would then send these push notifications to these potential victims and then call them on the phone pretending to be support from the currency exchanges or from Google. And while they had them on the phone, they would trick them into handing over their passwords, their private keys, all of the information that is necessary to access their cryptocurrency holdings. Once they had that information, they would steal, allegedly, the cryptocurrency. They would then launder that cryptocurrency in offshore exchanges and then convert that into hard cash, money that prosecutors say was spent quite lavishly, including on purchasing dozens of exotic cars, one worth $3.8 million. Also spending that money on expensive handbags and clothing, on private jets, on private homes in Florida and California. And then they would try to conceal this, prosecutors say, by putting those properties and those items, those exotic cars, in other people's names to cover their tracks. Some of this money was even distributed, prosecutors say, to these associates in duffel bags and also stuffed inside stuffed animals that were sent through the mail, one of them containing, prosecutors say, $50,000 US. Now, he faces 3 charges. The RICO conspiracy charge is the most serious here. This is a charge that is often used on mafia bosses. That comes with an up to life sentence. The other 2 charges, wire fraud and money laundering, themselves each carry a up to 20-year prison sentence.
Toni, details of that lavish spending, they were in the news almost as much as what Mr. Lam and his accomplices were accused of committing. Now, can these funds be recovered? And what sort of compensation might victims get?
Well, a lot of these assets, which prosecutors say were bought with this stolen, fraudulent money, has already been taken into the Department of Justice holdings. I just want to show you here. This is the charging sheet, and this is just some of the items that prosecutors say they bought. And we're talking about pages and pages of exotic items, things like a Christian Dior clothing and T-shirts, exotic cars, Louis Vuitton shoes, gray-colored Dior shoes. I mean, the list just goes on and on with these items that they allegedly bought with this laundered money. If he is found guilty in this case, and also if the other associates are also found guilty, then these items, which have already been confiscated by the Department of Justice, could then be sold, and some of those proceeds could go to those victims. One of those victims actually lives here in Washington, D.C. They're not identified in this charging dock, but part of the scheme that Lam is accused of carrying out is stealing 4,100 bitcoins from somebody located here in Washington, D.C. At the time in 2024, those were worth $230 million. of course, as you mentioned, in today's money, worth hundreds of millions of dollars more than that.
Oh, thanks for that. Toni Waterman covering the story for CNA from Washington, D.C., of course, the start of that trial for Singaporean Malone Lam and his accomplices.